Mr. President, I usually don't get up in the morning and race to read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. It's just not part of my normal routine. I don't agree with them on most of the positions that they have taken, and I have found many times that the statements they make are sometimes grossly inaccurate. This morning was no exception. They printed an editorial on the issue of interchange fees on debit cards, and had some critical things to say, which is their right and my responsibility as an elected official to absorb. I know the folks on Wall Street and their friends in the press are not happy with the interchange reform which Congress passed last year. They are certainly entitled to their opinion, but they are not entitled to their own alternative reality. When I read this Wall Street Journal editorial this morning, I felt like I had entered into some fact-free twilight zone. Swipe fee reform is an important issue, so that the people who are following this debate understand what we're talking about. Each time that you use a credit card or a debit card to pay for something, a meal at a restaurant, groceries, pharmaceuticals, a donation to a charity, buying gas for your car, each time that you do, there is a fee that is charged to the merchant. And that fee is charged by both the bank issuing the card and the underlying credit card company. It is called an interchange fee. And it is a fee that is imposed on businesses, large and small, all across America, literally without negotiation. It is a fee that is dictated because there is little or no competition. Now, the Wall Street Journal probably prides itself on being the protector and defender of the free market system. There is no free market system when it comes to interchange fees. It's a take it or leave it. If you want to accept a Visa or MasterCard from a certain bank, you will pay a certain interchange fee every time a card is used at your establishment. And what I learned in a hearing on this subject years ago is that there is virtually no negotiation in establishing these fees. And merchants came to me. The first who came to me was not a major retailer, but a buddy of mine in Quincy, Illinois, named Rich Neiman. Rich Neiman is a very conservative man who probably reads the Wall Street Journal every day, but he has done quite well for himself and his family and his company by opening up food stores all over the Midwest. Rich is a really roll-up-your-sleeves, grassroots businessman. And he said to me, Senator Durbin, these credit card companies and their banks are killing us. The interchange fees bear no relationship to the actual cost of the transaction. He said, you know, if somebody pays for groceries with a check, it clears the bank for pennies, regardless of whether the check is for $10 or $100. If they use a debit card, which is a plastic check, drawing directly out of your account to pay, it ends up we pay an interchange fee which is substantially higher, and we have nothing we can say about it. Now, the Wall Street Journal, the defender of the free market system, the defender of competition, has to acknowledge the reality that there is no competition when it comes to these duopolies, Visa and MasterCard, and little competition when it comes to merchants who have no voice or little voice in establishing what their fee is going to be when it's charged. And so we came to the floor of the Senate and said, we need to have interchange fee reform. And the measure passed, the amendment passed by a margin of 64 votes, 17 Republicans and 47 Democrats, and then was accepted in conference and became part of the law and the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform. What it said was this: the Federal Reserve would analyze the current state of the market and establish what a reasonable and proportional interchange fee would be. What's fair? Since there's no competition here under the current system, let's at least establish what's fair. Let's not let Visa, MasterCard, and the banks fix prices here for lack of competition. Mr. President, you know what their early analysis showed? The average interchange fee was in the range of 40 cents per transaction. The actual cost, closer to 10 cents, maybe even less. They were charging 3 to 4 times as much over the cost of actually clearing the transaction to merchants and retailers across America, which of course diminishes their profitability, diminishes their ability to expand their small businesses and large alike, and it's passed on to the consumer. Now, you would think that even the Wall Street Journal, this bastion of conservatism and defender of the free market, would acknowledge the obvious. The obvious is small businesses and large businesses alike are being overcharged across America by credit card companies and banks without restraint. That's not a free market. That's imposing a cost. What is it worth? What is it worth in terms of interchange fees, which they refer to kind of dismissively as small and not to be concerned about? What is it worth to the credit card industry and the major banks in America every month? $1.3 billion in interchange fees collected on debit cards. $1.3 billion. So let's do the math here for a minute. It's over $15 billion a year. $15 billion a year, which the Wall Street Journal wants to protect as a handout to the biggest banks and credit card companies in America. Well, be my guest, Wall Street Journal. But don't stand up and say you're defending business across America, because businesses large and small are sick and tired of the non-competitive, opaque system that currently exists, that they're paying for. My amendment does not create price fixing. It places reasonable limits on price fixing that are already present in the interchange system. If you look at any bank's website, see if you can find how much that bank charges merchants in interchange fees. You won't find anything. There's no disclosure here. There's no transparency. Why? Because for years the banks have let Visa and MasterCard fix the interchange rate that each bank receives when its card is swiped. This means banks don't have to compete with one another on the fees they receive from merchants. They all receive the same fees, no matter how much any particular bank actually spends to process transaction or prevent fraud. The current interchange system, the one that needs to be reformed, is a price-fixing scheme, period. My amendment simply says that if big banks are going to let Visa and MasterCard duopoly fix fees on their behalf, the Federal Reserve should regulate those fees so they are reasonable. If a bank wants to charge its own fees to reflect the cost it bears, so be it. My amendment does not regulate that. As long as those fees are transparent and competitive, I'm fine with them. But when the banks all get together, when they conspire to let Visa and MasterCard fix fees for them, that's when my amendment steps in, and that is what offends the Wall Street Journal, the defender of America's free markets. We know that big banks today receive far more in interchange than it costs them to do debit transactions. They use this excess interchange subsidy for things like ads and reward programs and executive bonuses, and certainly for profits. That's what they do. The effect of my amendment will be to squeeze the fat out of the interchange system. Big banks will still be able to use interchange to pay for reasonable processing costs, but they won't be able to use this interchange scheme to take excessive fees out of the pockets of merchants and their customers. Well, you might ask, Mr. President, is this the case in every country? And the answer is no. In other countries that use Visa and MasterCard, something interesting has occurred. Do you know what the interchange fee is on Visa and MasterCard debit card transactions in Canada? Zero. No fee. Do you know what it is in Europe? It's a tiny fraction of what it is in the United States. So for Visa and MasterCard and the banks that issue these cards to argue that even reducing interchange fees will cripple them, will force them to raise fees, will cancel services that they already offer, is to belie the reality that in many places in the world, unlike America, they are not overcharging merchants. They have reasonable interchange fees, and in some places, no interchange fees. Let's look at the Wall Street Journal's claim that because of swipe fee reform, you'll soon be paying for check writing privileges. Well, this is an old saw. We've heard it before. And it's surprising the Wall Street Journal would repeat this argument to say that interchange reform will cause people to start paying for their own checking accounts. I would urge them, if they can, to read back issues of their own newspaper. Let's go back to November 12, 2008, Wall Street Journal, article entitled, quote, "Banks Boost Customer Fees to Record Highs." Well, this was long before the Durbin Amendment, Mr. President. They were already raising fees, and they will continue to raise fees, and that's why some of the banks enjoy huge profit margins and bonuses, dramatic bonuses for the executives that work there. They might read the opening line of that article, which said, quote, "Banks are responding to the troubled economy by jacking up fees on their checking accounts to record amounts." I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal. They were already raising fees on customers long before this debate began. Another line in the same article says the average cost of checking account fees, including ATM surcharges, bounce check fees, and monthly service fees, have hit record highs. Mr. President, that was 2008, long before our debate on the floor here. If the Wall Street Journal's writers can't be bothered to even read their own newspaper, I urge them to read what the Bank of America spokeswoman, Ann Pace, told the Associated Press October 19, 2010. She said, quote, "Customers never had free checking accounts. They always paid for it in other ways, sometimes with penalty fees," close quote. Again, this is a spokesman for the industry being brutally honest about free checking. It astonishes me how many people simply repeat the banking industry's talking points without ever doing any fact-checking. Banks always say that if anybody tries to regulate them, it will lead to higher consumer fees and checking fees, and reporters print it like it's the gospel. Hasn't anyone ever realized that threatening higher consumer fees is a great strategy to scare away any efforts at reform? It's a great tactic because it's all speculation. You can't prove or disprove for sure what's going to happen in the future. What we can do is look at past experience and use it as a guide. For example, we know from the last few years that banks and credit card companies have constantly tried to raise fees both on consumers and merchants as high as the market will allow them to go, despite the recession. And we know from experience that competitive markets, which the Wall Street Journal should honor before they honor these duopolies involved in price fixings, competitive markets overseen by reasonable regulation are the best way to keep fees and prices at an appropriate level. Unfortunately, we also know the current interchange system is an unregulated, uncompetitive market. That's why we see fees that are hidden, non-negotiable, and many times higher what a competitive market would produce. Let's talk about the Journal's views on how swipe fee reform will impact consumers. I don't know that the Wall Street Journal would be viewed by many, if any, as a great pro-consumer publication. This morning, they wanted to wear that mantle. They say it's a hoax that reform is pro-consumer. Then, as usual, the little guy is going to get trampled. Mr. President, how frequently have you turned to the Wall Street Journal to find out who's going to stand up for the little guy in America? Almost never, in my case. And certainly they have this wrong. Some might say it's great the Wall Street Journal now cares about consumers. Of course, I'd feel better about it if they hadn't read yesterday's editorial in the Journal. That's the one where they said they'd like to see Congress kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a series, Mr. President. There is a recurring theme here, Mr. President, and the theme is consumers are going to lose, and merchants are going to lose, and small business is going to lose if this defender of the free market, the Wall Street Journal, has its ways. Here's the reality. Consumers right now are already paying for the interchange system. In November 2009, the GAO said that under the current system, merchants pass on their increasing card acceptance costs to the customers. The Consumer Federation of America, which supports my amendment and opposes the repeal that is now underway, does care about consumers. That's why they exist. Here's what they said in a letter this week. The current interchange system is uncompetitive, non-transparent, and harmful to consumers. It is simply unjust to require less affluent Americans who do not participate or benefit from the payment card or banking system to pay for excessive debit interchange fees that are passed through to the cost of goods and services. That quote from the Consumer Federation of America. U.S. PIRG, Public Citizen, Hispanic Institute submitted testimony last month where they said the current swipe fee market is broken and all consumers pay more for less because of escalating swipe fees. They also said, quote, 16 countries in the European Union regulate swipe fees, these interchange fees, and their experience demonstrates that regulation benefits consumers in lower fees and lower costs of goods. Make no mistake, Mr. President, what's at stake here with the effort to repeal or delay the implementation of this reform on behalf of businesses, large and small across America. What's at stake here, Mr. President, is a handout to the largest banks in America and the credit card companies of more than $15 billion a year. A bailout wasn't enough for these big banks. Now they want a handout. And the Wall Street Journal is standing by the sidelines applauding that notion. These defenders of free enterprise can't wait to construct a system where the largest banks on Wall Street and the credit card giants can take more money out of our economy from small businesses and consumers alike. That's their idea of free enterprise. It's not mine. The Wall Street Journal accuses me of pushing for swipe reform as a, quote, sop to Walmart, Home Depot, and other giant retailers. Well, make no mistake. Every merchant, every business accepting debit cards is going to be affected by this reform, large and small. But the facts tell us a different story, too. Everyone who accepts debit cards will benefit from swipe fee reform. Not just big merchants, but small businesses, universities, healthcare providers, charities, government agencies, as well as many others, convenience stores, the list goes on. I ordered a study 2 years ago and held a hearing last year in my Appropriations Subcommittee on how much the federal government pays in interchange fees with our taxpayers' dollars. The total was $116 million a year. Those who are supporting the repeal or delay of this reform are imposing additional debt on a government already deep in debt. And where will those debts be incurred? For the biggest banks on Wall Street and the biggest credit card companies by and large. I tried to reform the government interchange rate on my appropriations bill last year, but couldn't get it through. I'll be back. I've been at this interchange reform effort for a number of years now. I got into it because of a hearing held by then Republican Senator Arlen Specter. Before that hearing, I didn't even understand this issue. After it, I decided something had to be done. I wouldn't be doing this if it were just for the big box companies. I wouldn't be fighting so hard for reform if it wasn't good for small businesses and certainly good for the consumers and the American economy. I hope the Wall Street Journal is aware that card companies like Visa charge higher interchange fees to small businesses than to big businesses. How do you like that for competition? Small businesses get it the worst under the current system. Wouldn't it be nice if the Wall Street Journal stood up for small businesses once in a while? Go look at Visa's website at their interchange rates for retail debit. You'll see right now the biggest retailers have to pay an interchange fee of 0.62% plus 13 cents a transaction. Smallest retailers, 0.95% plus 20 cents a transaction. Dollar for dollar interchange reform will help small businesses more than big ones. That's the reality of this reform. Mr. President, I don't expect to ever be endorsed by the Wall Street Journal. I don't even know if they make endorsements. I haven't even asked. But I'm going to insist that they stick with the facts. And I know the Wall Street Journal isn't going to stray very far from Wall Street banks, which bear the same basic name, as well as the credit card companies that are duopolies in this American economy. I'm going to continue this battle for Main Street, not Wall Street. I urge my colleagues who are being inundated, literally inundated by banking lobbyists right now to stop this reform, that when they go home, steer away from the big banks. Go to the small businesses that accept credit cards and debit cards. Go to any one of them and ask them whether they think this is an important reform for the future of their small business, their employees, and for the local economy. I think they're going to hear the other side of the stories. Some of these small businesses can't afford the lobbyists that are prowling the halls of Washington today, but they deserve our attention as much, if not more, than the big banks on Wall Street and the credit card companies.